Be me, Alan, just a regular guy in his late 20s. I have a decent job in an office, nothing glamorous. I pay my bills on time, go to the gym a few times a week, and play video games to unwind. My parents raised me to be polite, to hold doors open, to help people if they need it. Just basic common decency stuff. I never thought of it as a strategy or anything. It was just how you were supposed to act. This whole story started a few months back, maybe late spring, when the weather was just starting to get nice. A buddy from work was having a barbecue at his place. It was a pretty chill afternoon, just a bunch of us hanging out in his backyard. That's where I first met Megan. She came with one of my friend's coworkers, so I'd never seen her before. My first impression was that she was very loud, not just her voice, but her whole presence. She immediately became the center of attention in her little group. I was mostly just minding my own business, talking about a new game with another friend. At some point, she joined our conversation. We were talking about a movie we'd all seen recently, just a dumb action flick. She immediately steered the conversation to how the female characters were poorly written and served the male gaze. Then she started going on about the director's history of problematic statements. I just sort of nodded along. I'm not the kind of person who enjoys arguing, especially with a stranger at a party. It's just easier to let people have their say. She talked a lot about male toxicity and how hard it was to find men who weren't part of the problem. I remember thinking it was a heavy topic for a casual BBQ. I didn't engage much, just gave some non-committal and I see answers. The party ended, we all went home, and I pretty much forgot about her entirely. She was just another person you meet once and never see again. Or so I thought. Fast forward a couple of weeks. I was driving home from work. It was one of those miserable days. The sky had opened up, and rain was coming down in sheets. The kind of rain where your windshield wipers can't keep up. I was tired, hungry, and just wanted to get back to my apartment. As I was taking a side street to avoid some traffic, I saw a car pulled over on the shoulder. Hazard lights were blinking weakly through the downpour. I slowed down and saw someone standing outside the car, getting absolutely soaked. My first instinct was just to keep driving. It was late, the weather was awful, and it wasn't my problem. But as I got closer, I recognized the person. It was Megan. She was on her phone, looking completely frantic and miserable. I could practically feel the frustration coming off her in waves. I let out a big sigh. I knew what I had to do. My dad's voice was in my head, telling me you don't just leave someone stranded on the side of the road, especially in a storm. I pulled over about 20 feet ahead of her and put my own hazards on. I grabbed the big umbrella I keep in my back seat and walked back to her car. She didn't see me coming at first. When I got to her window, I tapped on the glass. She jumped and looked at me with this wide-eyed, suspicious look. It was that look women sometimes give you when they think you're a creep who's about to bother them. I just pointed at my face and said my name, reminding her we met at the barbecue. Her expression changed from fear to recognition, and then to annoyance, as if my presence was just another inconvenience. She rolled down her window a crack. I asked if she was okay. She told me her tire was completely flat and that she'd been waiting for roadside assistance for over an hour. They kept telling her the wait would be long because of the weather. I looked at the tire. It was sitting on the rim. I told her I could probably change it for her if she had a spare. She looked at me again, skeptical, like she was trying to figure out my angle. I could see her thinking, calculating what I would want in return. I just wanted to get home. I told her it was no problem. I've changed plenty of tires before. It would be faster than waiting for a tow truck. She finally agreed, though she still seemed uneasy about it. She popped the trunk and stood back under the tiny sliver of shelter the trunk lid provided while I did all the work. The next 15 minutes were pure misery. The rain was cold and relentless. My umbrella was useless while I was working. I got the spare and the jack out of her trunk. It was buried under a pile of reusable grocery bags and other random stuff. I had to kneel on the wet, gritty pavement to get the jack in place. The lug nuts were on super tight. I had to put my entire body weight into the wrench to get them to budge. Cold, dirty water was soaking through the knees of my pants. My hands were covered in grease and grime. All the while, she just stood there, holding her phone and watching me. She didn't say a word. I finally got the flat tire off and the donut spare on. I tightened everything up, lowered the car, and threw all the tools and the busted tire back in her trunk. I was drenched. My work clothes were probably ruined. My hands were freezing and black with road filth. I stood up and told her the spare was good enough to get her home or to a tire shop. She just stared at me for a moment. Then she gave a small, almost forced-looking smile. She offered a quick thank you. It sounded like she was reading from a script. I just nodded, said, "Drive safe," and started walking back to my car. I didn't ask for her number, didn't try to make conversation, didn't ask for anything. I just got in my car, cranked up the heat, and drove off. In my rearview mirror, I could see her still standing there for a second before getting into her own car. I got home, took the longest, hottest shower of my life, and threw my clothes straight into the trash. I figured that was the end of that. I did a good deed. Story over. Later that night, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. It was her. My work buddy must have given her my number. The message wasn't just a simple thank you. It was a whole paragraph. She wrote that she was still in shock, that she couldn't believe a man would stop and help a woman like that with no ulterior motives. She called me her knight in shining armor and said I had restored her faith in humanity. It felt a little over the top, but I figured she was just being dramatic. I texted back something simple. "No problem at all, glad I could help. Get that tire fixed soon." I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. That text was not an ending. It was an invitation. The next day I got another text. It was a long rant about her boss. Apparently he had asked her to redo a report she'd submitted. She interpreted this as him undermining her professional authority. She went on about how he was a perfect example of mediocre male confidence. I had no idea how to respond to that. I was at work, trying to focus. So I just sent back a generic, "Wow, that sucks." That reply was a mistake. It was positive reinforcement. It told her I was willing to listen. And so it began. My phone started to become a direct pipeline for every single negative thought and minor inconvenience in Megan's life. It was like I had unknowingly signed up for a newsletter of complaints. At first it was maybe 1 or 2 texts a day, annoying but manageable. I would give short, non-engaging replies, hoping she'd get the hint. She did not get the hint. The frequency increased. Soon it was a constant stream of messages from morning until night. The topics varied, but they were always complaints. Her roommate left a dish in the sink. The barista at the coffee shop didn't smile at her. The new season of a show she liked was full of problematic tropes. Every minor issue was framed as some grand injustice, a symptom of a sick and broken world that was conspiring against her personally. And then came the dating stories. Oh, the dating stories. She had just gotten back on the dating apps and decided that I, for some reason, was the perfect person to hear every single detail. I became her personal dating diary. There was the guy who was perfect on paper, but she discovered he was only 5'9" and had lied about being tall. This prompted a 2-day-long text marathon about how men are fundamentally insecure and deceptive. I didn't even know what to say. I just sent a thumbs-up emoji. Then there was the guy who took her to a nice dinner, but had the audacity to suggest they split the bill. This was, in her words, a massive red flag, and proof that he didn't value her time or femininity. She sent me screenshots of their conversation, demanding that I validate her anger. I replied, "Yeah, that's awkward." But the main event, the recurring character in her drama series, was a guy I mentally nicknamed Chad. I never got his real name, but from her description, he was the stereotypical tall, handsome, emotionally unavailable guy. She was obsessed with him. My phone would be flooded with analyses of his behavior. He hadn't texted her back in 3 hours. Was he busy, or was he ghosting her? She would send me paragraphs exploring every possibility. He used a period at the end of a text message. She saw this as a clear sign of his passive-aggressive anger and toxic avoidance. She would complain constantly about how he never made firm plans, how he was emotionally distant, how he clearly didn't respect her. But in the next breath, she would gush about how charismatic he was, or show me a blurry picture of him from his profile. My role in all of this was to listen, to absorb her frustration, to validate her feelings, and to tell her she deserved better. I was the good guy who was supposed to clean up the emotional mess left by the bad boys she actually wanted to date. The worst part was how one-sided it was. In the entire time this was happening, months of near constant communication, she never once asked me how I was doing. Not once. Our entire dynamic was built around her problems. I could have won the lottery or been diagnosed with a terminal illness, and she never would have known. I remember one specific time, I was having a really rough week at work. A huge project had gone wrong, and my team was scrambling to fix it. I was stressed out and barely sleeping. She sent another wall of text about how Chad had canceled their plans at the last minute. Just for a second, I thought I'd try to connect with her as a human. I replied, "Sorry to hear that. I'm having a rough week myself, actually. Work has been crazy." Her response came back almost instantly. "OMG. I know, men at work are the worst. They create so much drama. Anyway, do you think I should text him back or just wait for him to reach out?" She completely ignored my comment. It was like I hadn't even typed it. My life, my problems, my feelings, they were completely irrelevant. They were just a speed bump on the highway of her own drama. That was the moment I started to feel a real sense of resentment. I wasn't her friend. I was a utility. I was an emotional sponge. My politeness, my simple act of changing a tire in the rain, had been twisted into a lifelong subscription to her personal reality show. And I was getting tired of watching. My replies became shorter and less frequent. I'd leave her messages on, read for hours before sending a one-word answer. K, LOL, crazy. I hoped that my lack of engagement would eventually bore her, that she would find some other guy to be her sounding board. But it was like she didn't even notice. The monologues just kept coming. It felt like I was being held hostage by my own good manners. I didn't know how to tell her to stop without causing a huge confrontation, and the idea of that was exhausting. So I just kept enduring it, feeling my battery drain a little more with each buzz of my phone. The dynamic was set. I was the reliable, platonic male friend who existed solely to absorb her negativity. She'd often say things that were thinly veiled compliments, but felt more like definitions of my role. Things like, "It's so rare to find a guy I can talk to about this stuff who doesn't immediately make it about himself." Or, "You're like my safe space to vent about all the toxic guys out there." She was basically telling me, "You're great because you have no needs of your own and exist only to serve mine." The irony was palpable. She would complain for hours about men being selfish, all while being the most selfish person I knew. The weeks turned into a couple of months. The season started to change. Summer was ending. My patience had already ended long ago. I started putting her notifications on mute. It helped a little. I no longer had to see her name pop up on my screen 20 times an hour. But I still knew the messages were there, piling up, waiting for me. It was a constant low-level source of stress in the back of my mind. I started to feel like a fool. I had let this happen. I had let my desire to be a nice guy turn me into a doormat. I felt trapped by a single act of kindness. Every time I thought about just blocking her, a part of me felt guilty. That little voice in my head, the one that tells you to be polite, told me it would be a cruel thing to do. But another louder voice was starting to speak up. It was telling me that my time and my mental peace were valuable. It was telling me that I didn't owe her anything, especially not this. I was just waiting for a reason, for a final push to do what I already knew I needed to do. I didn't know it then, but that final push was coming very soon. It was building up, like the pressure before a storm. All it needed was one last drop of rain. The day it all ended started like any other. It was a weekday, probably a Tuesday or Wednesday. Just a normal, boring day at the office. I had a major project deadline looming, the kind of deadline that means you're eating lunch at your desk and staying late. The pressure was on. My boss was stressed, which meant everyone on the team was stressed. The whole day was a blur of spreadsheets, emails, and hurried meetings. My phone was on silent in my pocket. I didn't have time for distractions. By the time I finally packed up to leave, it was already dark outside. I was mentally and physically exhausted. My brain felt like a fried egg. All I wanted was to go home, eat something that wasn't from a vending machine, and stare at a wall for an hour. I got in my car and started the long drive home through rush hour traffic. As I was sitting in a sea of red taillights, I finally checked my phone. There were, of course, a dozen notifications from Megan. I ignored them and put on a podcast, trying to decompress. I made it home, kicked off my shoes, and threw my keys on the counter. My apartment was quiet. That's how I liked it. I was about to start making dinner when my phone buzzed again. A new message from her. I sighed and decided to just get it over with. Skim whatever crisis was happening today and send a non-reply. I opened our chat history. It was a wall of text, as usual. But this time, it was accompanied by something new. It was a 5-minute long audio message. My thumb hovered over the play button. I really didn't want to listen to it. I knew it would just be more negativity, more drama that had nothing to do with me. But a small, morbidly curious part of me needed to know what could possibly warrant a 5-minute voice memo. I put the phone to my ear. Her voice came through the speaker, thick with tears and outrage. She was practically sobbing. It took me a minute to even decipher what she was saying through the crying. The crisis, the source of this emotional hurricane, was this. The guy she'd been on 2 dates with, some new character in her rotating cast of villains, had not posted a Happy International Day of the Girl message on his Instagram story. I'm not even kidding. That was it. She had apparently seen that it was some designated UN day, and had been waiting for him to post something about it to prove he was a true ally. He had posted a picture of his lunch instead. Through her sobs, she called this the ultimate act of patriarchal indifference. She said it was a window into his soul and proved he didn't see or value women. She was genuinely hysterically crying over an Instagram story. I stood there in my quiet kitchen, listening to this. I thought about my own day, the real stress, the actual problems I had to solve, the pressure from my boss. I thought about how I hadn't had a proper meal all day, and how my shoulders were aching from being hunched over a keyboard for 10 hours. And here was this person, having a complete and utter meltdown over something so trivial, so meaningless, that it was almost laughable. The contrast was just staggering. Her world was a bubble of manufactured outrage. My world was real. The audio message ended with her tearfully asking me to call her because she couldn't be alone right now. I lowered the phone from my ear and stared at it. And in that moment, something inside me just switched off. It wasn't anger. It wasn't frustration. It was nothing. It was the cold, quiet clarity of being completely and totally done. The guilt was gone. The sense of obligation was gone. All that was left was a profound sense of indifference. I did not reply. I put my phone face down on the counter, walked over to my fridge, and finally started making myself dinner. I ate my food in peace. I watched a show on TV. I tidied up my living room. For the first time in months, I wasn't letting her drama dictate my evening. My phone buzzed a few more times, but I ignored it. I was taking my evening back. It felt good. It felt like I could breathe again. Later that night, before going to bed, I picked up my phone to set my alarm. I saw the messages she had sent since the voice note. First, a simple question mark. Then, about an hour later, "Alan, are you there?" Then came the passive aggression. "Wow, I guess I know who my real friends are. Thanks for the support." I read them, felt absolutely nothing, and set my alarm for the next morning. I slept better than I had in a long time. The next morning, I woke up to what can only be described as a novel. She must have been up all night stewing in her own anger. It was a massive multi-paragraph block of text, the final boss of text messages. Her tone had shifted from victimhood to pure, unfiltered rage. The message started by accusing me of ghosting her in her time of need. Then it quickly devolved into a character assassination. "I should have known," she wrote. "You're just like all the other men." She called me a classic nice guy, the kind who pretends to be a friend just to get something from a woman. She claimed my entire act of kindness, from changing her tire to listening to her problems, was all a calculated scheme to try and date her. According to her, my silence was my true self emerging. The real me was a bitter, resentful man who was punishing her for not being romantically interested in him. It was a masterpiece of projection. She had constructed this entire narrative in her head, where she was the innocent victim and I was the manipulative villain. She wrote that my behavior was a form of toxic masculinity because I couldn't handle a woman's emotions. She ended her tirade with a grand finale. Real men aren't afraid to support women emotionally. They see it as their duty to help dismantle the patriarchy. You are just a coward. You are part of the problem. I read the whole thing, from start to finish, and I just started to laugh. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a laugh of sheer, unadulterated relief. The absurdity of it was just perfect. Here was a person I owed nothing to, a person who had used me as a free emotional dumping ground for months, now lecturing me on my duty as a man. She had never once supported me. She had never once shown a single shred of interest in my life. But I owed her my unending emotional labor. It was my duty. Her message was a gift. It was the final, absolute confirmation that I was doing the right thing. It erased any last lingering traces of guilt I might have had. She didn't see me as a person. She saw me as a service provider who had just gone on strike. And she was furious, not because she'd lost a friend, but because she'd lost a convenience. I didn't even think about crafting a reply. There was nothing to say. There was no argument to be won. Arguing with someone like that is like playing chess with a pigeon. It'll just knock over the pieces, crap on the board, and strut around like it won anyway. So I did the simplest, most peaceful thing I could do. I opened her contact info. I scrolled down to the bottom. I pressed the little red button that said, "Block this caller." A confirmation window popped up. "Are you sure you want to block this contact?" I pressed block contact without a moment's hesitation. And just like that, she was gone. Her novel of a text message, her chat history, her entire presence in my life, vanished. I looked at my phone screen. The silence was beautiful. A huge weight lifted off my shoulders. A weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying until it was gone. It felt like quitting a job you hate. It was pure, unadulterated freedom. The rest of my day was great. I was focused at work. I was more relaxed. I didn't have that constant background hum of anxiety, wondering when my phone would buzz with the next manufactured crisis. My life was mine again. I never heard from her again, obviously. I have no idea what she's doing now, and I have zero desire to find out. I hope she found another knight in shining armor to absorb her negativity, but it's not going to be me. Looking back, I learned a pretty valuable lesson from all of this. Being a good person doesn't mean you have to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. Politeness is not a contract for endless emotional servitude. You can be kind and helpful, but you also have to have boundaries. You have to protect your own peace. I'll still stop and help someone with a flat tire, but I won't let them move into my head rent-free ever again. My phone is a lot quieter these days, and I wouldn't have it any other way.